This video is the Paperspace and Plotting to Scales introduction using AutoCAD. What you see here before you is what is called model space. In model space, our work is done. The important thing about model space is that everything is drawn full scale, 1:1. If something is very, very large, then accommodations have to be made with the annotations. The annotations are the dimensions, the text, the center lines, all those things that help in the description of the model. Those things have to be adjusted to accommodate that size. And so we will be going over how to make this happen, especially if things are very large. Right now we have a typical sized piece that has been created here. In model space we can zoom, we can pan, and you can see here we have what's called layers that show the different pieces of this model. Our main object being white, and the dimensions being red, and the section lines being red, and the center lines being magenta. And so you can see all this in model space. Some things that are important about this is that as we make our decision on what scale these drawings are going to be drawn at, we need to make sure that our dimensions follow those scales. I'm going to go into the Properties dialog box, and I'm going to select a dimension to see the properties of that dimension. In this miscellaneous section, you'll notice the annotative scale. If I select the annotative scale and go in here, you'll notice that in the object scale list, there are 2 scales listed. If you want your model to be at a scale that is not listed here, the dimensions will not show up in Paperspace. And I will give you an example of that coming up. So right now we have 2 scales listed here. Down here is the annotation scale. And if I switch that to 1:2, you'll see the dimensions change size. If this is the desired scale, then some adjustments have to be made to the scale so that they're visible and they're correctly showing. I'll switch that back to 1:1 scale because that is the preferred scale that we'll be using. I will now try to explain Paperspace in a very simplistic manner. We have this model that is created. Sometimes drawings are created in 3D. A piece of paper is 2D. And so to get that combination to work, they've created what's called Paperspace. I'm going to move into Paperspace now, and you'll notice here that we're in Model Space as indicated by the Model Space tab. I'm going to click the Layout one, which takes us to the Paperspace. In Paperspace, what we've done is we've placed a digital piece of paper over the top of the model that was drawn. And in order to see that model, we have to take a digital pair of scissors and cut a hole into our paper to see through the paper to the model. I'll do that by doing what's called multi-view. Multi-view allows us to cut that hole into the paper. I'll cut what's called a viewport, and we can now see the model that was created there. You notice that the background is white, and that is because in Paperspace things are seen in white. In the real world, our drawings are black pencil and the paper is white. But for clarity in model spaces, as I switch back to that, the easiest way to see our model is if the background is black and our objects and things are white and colored. But in Paperspace, it's more real world. And so you'll notice here, I can switch back and forth between model space and Paperspace. Currently, as indicated here, we are in Paperspace. If I double click inside the viewport, we are now in model space, as shown here. I can zoom and pan inside model space. I need to show you what happens if we select a scale that is not appropriate to what has been identified for these dimensions. So I will select a 1:1 scale, and you'll see that the dimensions are here showing. I'm going to increase the size of this viewport so we can see things better. I'll now switch to 1:2, and you'll notice that the drawing scales down, but the dimensions are to maintain. There's a standard within drafting that when you have a finished drawing on paper, no matter what the scale is, the text height needs to be an 1/8 inch tall. And so in this case, we'd have to manipulate the dimensions to fit better around the drawing so that they showed properly. If I select a scale that was not listed in that list that we showed previously, I'll pick 2:1, you'll notice the dimensions disappear. And so a lot of times students are frustrated because their dimensions aren't there, and they need to understand that dimensions will not appear unless they are told to appear, and we tell them to appear over in the properties. I'll switch this back to 1:1 so that we can see our drawing. We're going to go back now to model space, And I want to switch drawings now because I need to show you a model that is large and what happens and how we deal with that. We have an architectural drawing here. I know that this is the technical portion of the training that we're going through, but to show this, I'm going to use an architectural floor plan. This architectural floor plan is literally 16 to 17 to 18 feet long. And so our dimensions have had to be scaled accordingly. I'm going to go into the properties and select one of these dimensions again to show you those scales. Currently, we have in our annotative scale for these dimensions 3 scales. The 1-to-1 obviously will not work because this model is 17 feet long and our working area is only 13-14 inches. So that model will completely disappear before our eyes. But we have 2 scales here that have been identified for this dimension. And so these scales are what we're going to be using. I'll switch back and forth between those and you can see what happens here. I'll switch back to 3/8 of an inch equals a foot and you'll see that the scale of the dimensions change. I'll switch to 1/4 inch equals a foot and you'll see that those change. I'll switch to 3/16 and you see that they disappear because that scale has not been assigned to the dimension. We'll stay in 1/4 inch equals a foot. Now I'm going to go over to Paperspace to show you what happens here. I need to cut a viewport. Type multi-view. I'll cut my viewport so that we can see our model. Right now the scale comes in showing things, but there's no scale selected. And so I need to get in here and get the scale selected. So I'm going to select the 1/4 inch equals a foot scale that was listed. And now we have a fairly decent size model in here. Let's see what 3/8 of an inch equals a foot shows. That's even better. Now I want to give you an example of what happens if we were to select 1-to-1. So I'm going to select the 1-to-1 scale and this part literally just disappears. What happens is we've zoomed in very, very close to the model. What you're looking at is a wall. This wall is 6 inches thick and it is showing it to scale on our paper. So therefore the necessity of what we're calling Paperspace. I'm going to switch back to 3/8 of an inch equals a foot so that we can see our drawing. I need to show you another example of what we have here. You'll notice here that we have a title block here for our drawing. I'm going to go back to the other model and you'll notice here that we don't have a title block. So this is done in Paperspace, and another reason for it. Our title block is put on the paper. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert the title block into Paperspace. I'll select the insert button here. I'll browse to where our title blocks are. Here I'm going to select the A size drawing. I'm going to open that up. Hit OK. I'll redefine it. That's just fine. And you'll see I have a hold of the title block. The title block fits on the paper. I'll place that. And then it's asking me some questions about what need to go in the information of the title block. This is called the hub. I'll put that information in there so that you can see that we're working on the hub. So there's where the title block comes in. Sometimes it's kind of nice to not see the viewport, and so in this case we can drag the viewport over the lines of the title block so that it disappears. It still exists, but it's not seen or visible. We can still manipulate it. Here we have 1-to-1, 1-to-2 inside our scale, even though the viewport isn't visible. Bring that back to 1-to-1. Okay, this has been the Paperspace and Plotting to Scales introduction video.